There comes a moment in the life of every soul when the familiar ground beneath your feet begins to tremble, not from any external earthquake, but from the deep stirring of something ancient and eternal that has been waiting in the underground chambers of your being. This is the moment Jung called the Great Descent, when consciousness can no longer sustain itself on the thin air of surface living and must journey downward into the rich, dark soil of the unconscious, where true nourishment awaits. For too long you have lived as a tenant in the upper floors of your own being, mistaking the penthouse of ego for the entirety of your inner architecture. The ego, that masterful architect of identity, has built such convincing structures, your roles, your achievements, your carefully curated sense of self, that you forgot there were deeper levels to explore. But now the foundation is calling, and you can no longer ignore the gravitational pull towards something more substantial, more real, more alive than the persona you have worn like a second skin. This descent is not a collapse but a homecoming. Like a river that has been dammed and diverted, your consciousness begins to find its way back to its original course, carving new channels through the landscape of your inner world. The ego, sensing this shift, may resist at first, clinging to its familiar territories, raising alarm bells about the dangers of the unknown depths. But something deeper than fear is stirring now, something that recognizes this journey not as a threat, but as the fulfillment of a sacred promise made long ago in the secret chambers of the soul. Jung understood that this moment marks the beginning of individuation, that lifelong process of becoming who you truly are beneath the layers of conditioning, expectation, and learned identity. It is the call to embark upon the hero's journey into the interior, where dragons are not slain but integrated, where treasures are not hoarded but shared, and where the ultimate discovery is not of something foreign but of the face you wore before you were born. The descent beckons with the patience of eternity itself. In the spaces between your thoughts lies a vast cathedral of silence, not the absence of sound, but the pregnant fullness from which all sound emerges and into which it returns. You have lived so long in the bustling marketplace of mental chatter that you forgot this sanctuary existed, this holy ground where awareness rests in its own nature, unadorned and undefended. The ego, that tireless narrator, has woven such an intricate tapestry of stories about who you are, what you need, where you're going, that the simple fact of your being has been obscured like stars hidden by city lights. But now, in moments that arrive unannounced, perhaps while watching rain streak down a window, or in the pause between exhale and inhale, you glimpse the one who witnesses all these stories without being authored by any of them. This is what Jung called the self, that deeper organizing principle that observes the ego's earnest performance, with the same loving attention a mountain gives to clouds passing over its peaks. The mountain does not resist the weather, nor does it identify with any particular formation of vapor and wind. It simply remains vast and patient, the unchanging ground upon which all change dances. Your relationship with thinking begins to shift like seasons turning. Where once you believed you were your thoughts, now you recognize yourself as the spacious awareness in which thoughts arise like birds taking flight from still water. Some thoughts are beautiful songbirds, others harsh crows, but you are neither the beauty nor the harshness. You are the sky through which they all move freely. The ego's desperate need to maintain a continuous commentary, to fill every silence with meaning-making, relaxes into comfortable gaps of pure being. In these sacred pauses, you taste something the mystics have pointed toward across centuries, the recognition that consciousness itself is the miracle, not its contents. You begin to live from this recognition, making decisions not from the cramped quarters of ego identification, but from the vast expanse of awareness that holds all experiences lightly, like a mother holding a sleeping child. The armor you have worn for so long, that intricate system of defenses designed to protect your image, your reputation, your carefully constructed sense of self, begins to feel less like protection and more like a prison. You notice how exhausting it has become to monitor every word, to calculate every gesture, to maintain the vigilant guardianship of a persona that was never truly you to begin with. Jung understood the persona as a necessary mask, a social function that allows us to navigate the world, but he also recognized the profound suffering that comes from mistaking the mask for the face beneath. The ego, in its well-meaning attempt to ensure survival and acceptance, has built elaborate fortifications around your tender authenticity. Every criticism once felt like cannon fire against the castle walls of identity, every judgment a siege upon the kingdom of self-worth. But now, something is shifting in the very foundations of this defensive architecture. Where once you would have mounted desperate counterattacks against any perceived slight, you find yourself genuinely curious about what others see, able to receive feedback without the automatic assumption that disagreement equals annihilation. This transformation does not happen overnight, like a switch being flipped, but gradually, like ice melting in spring sunshine. You begin to notice that the opinions of others about your performance have no power to touch the essential being that performed. It is like discovering that you are not the actor, but the stage upon which all dramas unfold, vast enough to hold comedy and tragedy with equal spaciousness, unchanging regardless of which play is currently being performed. The liberation that emerges from this recognition is not the cold indifference of disconnection, but the warm freedom of authentic engagement. When you no longer need to defend an image, you can respond to life directly, spontaneously, truthfully. The energy once consumed by the exhausting project of self-protection becomes available for genuine connection, creative expression, and the simple joy of being exactly who you are without apology or explanation. Jung called this the death of the old self. Not annihilation, but transformation into something immeasurably more alive. The raw landscape of your emotional world undergoes a profound metamorphosis, like a wild garden that was once either rigidly controlled or completely neglected, suddenly finding its natural rhythm under the tender care of conscious attention. For too long, the ego has related to emotions as either enemies to be conquered or indulgences to be pursued, treating anger as something shameful to suppress, sadness as weakness to overcome, joy as a prize to be grasped and held. But now, living from the depth of awareness, you begin to recognize emotions as the sacred messengers they have always been, each carrying vital intelligence about the state of your inner and outer worlds. Jung understood that true psychological maturity comes not from emotional numbness or uncontrolled reactivity, but from what he called the feeling function, that refined capacity to experience the full spectrum of human emotion while remaining rooted in the deeper awareness that witnesses all feelings without being destroyed by any particular emotional weather. Like a seasoned ship captain who has learned to read every nuance of wind and wave without being capsized by storms, you develop the ability to feel completely while staying anchored in the vast stillness that holds all movement. Anger transforms from the ego's weapon of defense into awareness's sacred information about violated boundaries. Instead of exploding in reactivity or imploding in suppression, you learn to receive anger's message with the respect due to a fierce guardian protecting something precious. Sadness no longer feels like evidence of your failure, but reveals itself as the heart's natural response to loss, opening doorways to compassion that were previously sealed by the ego's insistence on perpetual strength. Joy flows not from the ego's desperate grasping after pleasure, but from awareness's recognition of the inherent goodness that permeates existence, independent of circumstances. This emotional alchemy occurs not through techniques or strategies, but through the simple practice of feeling fully while remembering what you are beneath all feeling. The ego demanded that you only experience pleasant emotions. Awareness embraces the wisdom that comes from dancing with the entire symphony of human experience, knowing that every note serves the greater music of becoming whole. The relentless hunger of comparison, that insatiable appetite that has fed on measuring your worth against every other soul you encounter, begins to starve from lack of attention, like a fire that dies when no new fuel is added to its flames. You realize with startling clarity that this lifelong habit of positioning yourself on some imaginary hierarchy was never about discovering your true value, but about the ego's desperate attempt to establish a sense of identity through opposition, to know itself only in relation to what it is not. Jung recognized this as one of the ego's most cunning survival strategies, creating the illusion of separate selfhood through endless comparison. when the deeper truth is that all consciousness shares the same source. In the depths where awareness dwells, there exists no measurement system capable of quantifying the infinite uniqueness of your essential nature. How does one compare the sound of rain to the color of sunset? How does the ocean compete with the mountain, or the oak tree envy the rose? Each expression of consciousness is so utterly distinct in its manifestation, yet so completely identical in its source, that comparison becomes not just meaningless, but impossible, like trying to measure silence with a ruler, or weigh love on a scale. The ego's insecurity, which once fed voraciously on competitive positioning, needing to be smarter, more attractive, more successful, more spiritual than others, dissolves into the self's quiet confidence that knows its inherent worth without requiring external validation. This is not the arrogance of superiority, but the humility of recognizing that your value was never in question, was never dependent on outperforming anyone, was never separate from the value that pulses through all life. You discover that in the depth, there is no competition because there is no other, only the endless creativity of the one consciousness expressing itself through infinite forms, each playing its unique note in the grand symphony of existence. The fever breaks, the comparison mind quiets, and what remains is the profound peace of knowing yourself as both utterly unique and completely connected, needing nothing from anyone yet grateful for everything that is. The geography of choice transforms utterly when decisions begin arising from the underground rivers of deep knowing, rather than the surface streams of ego desire, social pressure, or the mind's endless calculations of advantage and loss. You discover that within you dwells an ancient compass that points not toward magnetic north, but toward the true north of your authentic nature, a guidance system that operates below the radar of rational analysis, yet proves more reliable than any strategy the thinking mind could devise. Jung recognized this as the discriminating wisdom of the self, that deeper intelligence which naturally knows what serves your individuation and what leads you further into the labyrinth of false identification. The sacred no emerges from this depth like an underground spring breaking through earth, not as rebellion against authority or selfish rejection of others' needs, but as the soul's fierce protection of its own integrity. When you speak this no, it carries the weight of mountains, the finality of natural law. It is not defensive but declarative, not angry but absolute. You find yourself declining invitations that would have thrilled your ego, walking away from opportunities that promise external validation but require the betrayal of inner truth, saying no to relationships that demand you be someone other than who you are becoming. Equally profound is the emergence of the holy yes, that spontaneous affirmation that springs from alignment with your deepest nature, rather than from people-pleasing, opportunity-grasping, or the ego's endless hunger for more. This yes carries the power of gravity, drawing you toward experiences, people, and paths that may offer no obvious rewards yet somehow nourish the mysterious process of becoming whole. You say yes to conversations that feed your soul, to challenges that crack open new dimensions of strength, to moments of beauty that serve no purpose other than to remind you of the inherent goodness that permeates existence. The ego once chose from a place of lacking, always trying to fill some perceived emptiness. Awareness chooses from fullness, recognizing that every authentic choice is simultaneously an act of self-discovery and self-creation, a vote for the world you wish to inhabit and the person you are called to become. The fabric of reality begins to reveal patterns that were always present but invisible to the ego's narrow gaze, those luminous moments when the inner and outer worlds converge in meaningful coincidence, when the universe seems to wink at you through synchronicities that defy logical explanation, yet pulse with undeniable significance. Jung called these causal connections, the language of the unconscious made manifest, the way the deeper intelligence of existence communicates through symbol timing and the mysterious orchestration of events that speak directly to the soul rather than to the calculating mind. Living from awareness rather than ego creates the inner spaciousness necessary to perceive these subtle communications, like tuning your radio to frequencies that were always broadcasting, but drowned out by the static of self-centered preoccupation. The ego, focused exclusively on its own agenda, sees only what serves its immediate purposes, filtering reality through the narrow lens of personal will and desire. But awareness perceives with the wide-angle vision of a mountain lake, reflecting the entire sky while remaining perfectly still, able to catch the delicate interplay between inner state and outer circumstance that reveals the deeper currents flowing beneath surface appearances. You begin to notice how the book that falls open to exactly the page you needed to read appears on the day you most need its message, how conversations with strangers carry precisely the insight your soul has been seeking, how obstacles that frustrate your ego's timeline prove to be perfectly timed invitations to develop patience, trust, or surrender. These are not mere coincidences, but glimpses into the vast intelligence that choreographs existence with the precision of a master weaver, each thread of experience contributing to a pattern too large for any single perspective to comprehend fully. Navigation begins to shift from the ego's method of forcing outcomes through will and strategy to awareness's way of reading the synchronistic currents and aligning with them like a skilled sailor working with wind and tide. You learn to trust the wisdom of a universe that speaks through meaningful coincidence, revealing paths forward that the linear mind could never have planned, but the deeper intelligence has been preparing all along. Your relationship to the great mystery of suffering undergoes a profound alchemical transformation, like lead transmuted into gold through the patient application of conscious attention, rather than the desperate attempt to escape or fix what cannot be changed. The ego, in its well-meaning but limited understanding, has always approached pain with the strategy of a firefighter, rushing in to extinguish the flames of discomfort as quickly as possible, treating every form of suffering as an emergency to be solved rather than a teacher to be honored. But living from awareness reveals suffering as one of existence's most powerful gateways to depth, compassion, and the kind of wisdom that can only be earned through direct experience of life's inevitable losses and limitations. You develop what Jung recognized as the capacity of the wounded healer, that archetypal figure who has descended into the underworld of their own pain and emerged not unscathed, but transformed, carrying within them the hard-won knowledge of how to hold space for darkness without being consumed by it. Your own journey through the valleys of grief, disappointment, betrayal, and loss becomes the foundation for a compassion that is not theoretical but embodied, not sentimental but fierce in its ability to remain present with what is rather than what should be. Where once you would have identified completely with your pain, becoming the suffering rather than the one who suffers, you now discover the vast awareness that can hold all experiences, pleasant and unpleasant alike, with equal steadiness, like a deep mountain lake that receives both sunshine and storm without losing its essential clarity. You learn to be fully present with difficult emotions without drowning in their turbulence. The ego's discomfort with suffering gives way to awareness's natural acceptance of the full spectrum of human experience. In the presence of others' pain, you no longer feel the compulsive need to offer solutions, advice, or false comfort. Instead, you become a sanctuary where difficult emotions can be felt and witnessed without judgment, where tears can fall without shame, where the unspeakable can finally find voice in the safety of unconditional presence. The subtle and seductive trap of spiritual materialism begins to dissolve like morning mist, touched by sunlight, as you recognize how even the most sacred practices can become corrupted by the ego's insatiable hunger for achievement, accumulation, and superior status. For so long, the seeking mind has approached awareness itself as another prize to be won, another peak to be conquered, another credential to be added to the resume of selfhood. You realize with humbling clarity how you have been using meditation as another form of self-improvement, collecting spiritual experiences like rare coins, measuring your progress against others on the path, and subtly inflating with each glimpse of expanded consciousness, as if these temporary openings were personal accomplishments rather than gifts of grace. Jung warned of this particular form of inflation, the way the ego can hijack even the most genuine spiritual experiences, and transform them into evidence of its own specialness, its own advancement beyond the ordinary masses, still trapped in unconscious living. But true depth reveals itself through a profound deflation of this spiritual pride, a recognition that what you have been seeking was never absent, never something to be attained through effort or technique, never dependent on any particular state of consciousness or quality of experience. The consciousness that is reading these words right now, the awareness that has been witnessing your entire life journey from your first breath to this very moment, this is not an achievement but your most intimate and immediate reality. It requires no special conditions, no altered states, no years of practice to validate its infinite worth. The ordinary awareness with which you experience disappointment is the same awareness through which you experience bliss. The consciousness that knows confusion is identical to the consciousness that knows clarity. Living from this recognition, you find yourself paradoxically becoming more human rather than more ethereal, more grounded in simple presence rather than elevated above ordinary existence. The search for extraordinary experiences gives way to the profound appreciation of washing dishes, breathing air, feeling your feet on the ground, all recognized as expressions of the same miraculous awareness that needs no improvement, no enhancement, no spiritual ornamentation to reveal its inherent perfection. The rigid architecture of either-or thinking, that mental fortress where the ego has taken refuge for so long, demanding that reality conform to its need for clear categories, simple answers, and comfortable certainties, begins to crack open like a seed that has been underground through winter, finally ready to sprout into the complex beauty of paradox. You discover within yourself a profound capacity to hold contradictory truths without the compulsive need to resolve them into neat packages that the mind can easily digest and file away. Jung understood this as the emergence of what he called the transcendent function, that mysterious ability of the psyche to contain opposing forces in creative tension until something entirely new is born from their dynamic interaction. Where once you needed to choose between being strong or vulnerable, you now recognize that true strength often reveals itself through the courage to be tender, that authentic power flows from admitting powerlessness. The ego's black and white world gives way to awareness's capacity to navigate infinite shades of gray, to embrace the mysterious coexistence of wisdom and foolishness, certainty and questioning, love and anger, hope and despair. You find yourself simultaneously ancient and newborn, knowing and innocent, complete and endlessly becoming. This integration of opposition does not happen through mental gymnastics or philosophical reasoning, but through the lived experience of staying present with whatever is arising without immediately rushing to judgment, explanation, or resolution. Like a skilled midwife who knows that birth requires both pressure and patience, you learn to trust the natural intelligence that emerges when contradictory forces are allowed to dance together, rather than being forced into premature synthesis. The ego demanded that life make sense according to its limited logic, that experiences fit neatly into pre-existing categories of good or bad, right or wrong, spiritual or mundane. But awareness reveals a reality far more mysterious and beautiful than any system of thought could contain, a living paradox where every ending is also a beginning, every loss contains the seed of discovery, every breakdown prepares the ground for breakthrough. You become comfortable with not knowing, recognizing mystery not as a problem to be solved but as the fundamental nature of existence to be embraced with wonder, humility, and the kind of reverence that can only arise from touching the infinite through the finite. Something entirely unexpected begins to emanate from your presence, not the forced charisma of the ego attempting to impress or manipulate, not the borrowed authority of position or credentials, but the unmistakable resonance of a soul that has stopped pretending to be anyone other than who they authentically are. This natural authority flows like an underground river surfacing, carrying with it the magnetic pull of genuine presence that others recognize at a level deeper than thought, deeper than judgment, deeper than the social calculations that usually govern human interaction. Jung understood this as the emergence of the self's inherent leadership, not the ego's desperate attempt to control outcomes, but awareness's effortless ability to create healing simply through the medicine of undefended authenticity. People begin to sense something real in your presence, something that gives them unconscious permission to lower their own masks and defenses, to breathe more deeply, to remember who they were before they learned to be someone else. It is not that you do anything differently, but that you have stopped doing so much, stopped performing, stopped managing impressions, stopped the exhausting dance of trying to be what others need you to be. This absence of pretense creates a field of safety where others can risk being genuine, where conversations move beyond small talk into the territories of truth that nourish the soul. Your influence now flows not from domination but from integration. Having made peace with your own inner authority, you no longer need external validation to know your worth, no longer require others' submission to feel powerful. The ego's model of leadership, built on hierarchy and control, gives way to awareness's understanding that true power is shared power, that genuine authority invites others into their own authenticity rather than demanding conformity to your vision. You become like a tuning fork that has found its true frequency. When struck, it resonates with such clarity that other instruments naturally align themselves to the same pure tone. This is not manipulation but invitation, not coercion but inspiration. Others are drawn not to follow you but to discover in your presence the courage to follow their own deepest knowing, to trust their own inner wisdom, to step into the fullness of who they came here to be.